All right, welcome back to the Boilermaker Breakdown podcast. I'm your host, Joey Hartzell, and I'm joined with Ethan Woody here. We are going to be breaking down kind of what we've seen from Purdue football this last week against Illinois and then previewing what's ahead with Minnesota. But first, I wanted to start off with a few minutes on basketball because obviously we do cover both. And in the last week, we've heard some new kind of fun stories come out from Purdue about Isaiah Thompson kind of making a interesting choice when setting up some teams and taking Jakari Harris first, allowing I don't know who the other GA was that was picking teams, but whoever it was blessed with a pair of All-Americans, or at least they thought so before the game started. And then Jakari Harris went for 30 points and led his team to a victory. So, kind of, do you think this is real? Like, what do you think the development from Jakari Harris is going to look like this year?
So I guess I'll start is it real? I could be interpreted two different ways. Did the event actually happen? That's been a little bit of discourse. I have no reason to doubt that it did. I don't think they would just lie about this sort of thing. And it makes sense. These are all Division I basketball players. One's going to have a better day than another at any given moment. Maybe that was the only day Jakari was better than Braden and TKR, but it happened, apparently. Now, is it real? Do I think Jakari Harris can be a 30-point per game scorer in college basketball, or more accurately, less tongue-in-cheek, do I think he's taken a big jump to be the surefire fifth starter, microwave scorer type? I don't buy that. I know in our basketball preview I talked about I thought CJ Cox would win this spot, and you were more bullish on the Jakari buzz. So I'll let you kind of speak your piece on that here in a second. But he's going from being a freshman to being a sophomore. A freshman who started day one and was clearly in over his head. They moved him to the bench, and by conference play, he seemed to figure some stuff out. Do I buy that he has taken a step forward and will be a better player this year than last year? Absolutely. Do I think that's a significant jump? Honestly, maybe. Yeah, I could buy that too. I thought he was notably worse than CJ Cox last year, and by all accounts throughout the summer, at worst, they're pretty much the same. There doesn't seem to be a standout between them. So in that sense, you could say Jakari gained some ground. Yeah, I'll bounce it to you here. What do you think about Jakari's 30-point outburst?
Yeah, I'm going to say, without a ton of knowledge on the teams, I'm going to guess Jakari Harris is probably one of the main ball handlers for his team, based on him being the leading scorer. I'm going to take a guess that Omer Mayer probably would have been mentioned if he was the lead ball handler on that team. He would have probably gotten a mention for playing well in that game, if I had to guess, because he's a guy that when you put the ball in his hands in a open gym type setting, I think that he's just going to pop because it's just super fun. He's got the fun, flashy passes that I'm sure he pulls out in open gyms, and he's got the step back threes and stuff like that. But I think Jakari Harris is this kind of meat and potatoes kind of scorer. He hits his catch and shoot when he's playing well, and when he's playing to what I think he is. He's hitting his catch and shoot threes. He's taking his opportunities. He's picking his spots well and getting to the basket pretty well. But I don't think he offers a ton just creating on his own. If that's there, he is pretty clearly, I think, the third starter. If he showed an ability to get something on his own every once in a while, to be able to take a mismatch and put him on an island a little bit, that's like a new player. But I still think the biggest step for him to earning that spot is on the defensive end. I think when you look at it, that's kind of the difference between CJ and Jakari last year a little bit at times. CJ was honestly a better defender, I think, even though Jakari was billed as the all Big Ten level defender. That's the area that I think Jakari needed to kind of take a leap in to really solidifying that third spot. Because I think if offensively he gives similar to a little bit better than what he was giving at the end of the year when he was hitting 40% of his threes, occasionally he was getting the basket. If you make that a little bit more consistent, up the volume slightly, that's enough offensively to fit into that spot, especially if he is getting to the rim. It was the defensive end. They needed a bulldog. They needed him to be a bulldog defensively to kind of justify that value, and he just wasn't quite good enough. He was still a good defender, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't like this game-changing point of attack defender that kind of he needed to be to earn those minutes. And so he looks a little bigger. I think he's filled out a little bit. And I'm sure that, playing against Braden every day in practice really develops your defense, especially against ball screens, which I think was kind of his biggest struggle on that end in specific was kind of navigating screens. So I don't know how much this means to me in terms of starting, even though it is kind of a flashy story.
I think the bigger tell here maybe than the 30-point outburst by itself, fun as that is maybe reading between the lines a little bit what the staff might be trying to tell us by sharing this story and highlighting Jakari as much as they have. And you can interpret that in a number of different ways. Maybe he's still a bench guy who they've just been really impressed with this summer. But this is reminding me a lot of last summer where we weren't really hearing that Jakari was like amazing from most of like the beat writers who were in the gym for practices. Not that he was bad, but they were going in there like, oh man, Jakari's like the guy. But that's kind of what we were hearing from the staff was like, Jakari is going to start. Jakari looks amazing. Now, last summer, that was based on his defense. They kept billing him as like, oh, he's like Lance Jones, but bigger, right? Just this like impact point of attack defender who can shut the water off on opposing pointers. I mean, I haven't heard them talk defensively about a perimeter player like that since Nojel Eastern, who, I mean, he shut down everyone from Cassius Winston to that Indiana freshman kid, 2018 lottery pick, Romeo Langford. And I mean, say what you want about Nojel's offense, like he was an all Big Ten caliber defender every single year on the perimeter. And that's kind of how they were talking about Jakari. And then it was pretty immediately apparent that he wasn't ready for that role. In theory, he does have the build. So if they want to say like, oh, he's taking a step defensively this year, that's why I want to start him, that I would buy. What I don't necessarily buy is, oh, Jakari can go get 30 on any given night. That's why he's in the starting lineup. So that's not what we need in the starting lineup. That just makes him skill set wise pretty redundant to CJ Cox and Omer Meyer, who we've already talked about why they might not start, particularly Meyer. He's not a good enough defender because it's all about who's going to be able to fit around Braden, Fletcher, Trey Kaufman-Renn. So whether he starts or not, clearly the staff is putting out some buzz on him. And we'll learn a couple short weeks how much stock to put in that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I do. Before we get too much further into the episode, I do want to credit that story to Brian Newber. I forgot to do that before we really got started there, and he does great work for Purdue, and want to make sure he gets credit for that story. But yeah, I think you spoke to it. Like, kind of the events of how it took place matter more than like it happening. Even if it was kind of this like, light a fire under him kind of move from Isaiah Thompson to like challenge him and try and, get something out of him they hadn't quite seen yet. You don't do that to a guy you're not like hoping or expecting to play a big, like if he was expected to be the 10th guy and play 4 minutes a game, you don't even try to do that because you're not concerned with what you can get out of your 10th guy in 4 minutes per game, because that's, you don't need special things out of your 10th guy who's giving you 4 minutes a game. Yeah. This speaks like we want to see you kind of come out of your shell and show us something and like prove why we think you're the 5th starter. I think that was kind of the move. Like, I think that was kind of big to me, is that they aren't doing this for Omer. They aren't doing this for CJ. They're not doing this for even an Anton West who's gotten a little bit of buzz, especially recently. And that's kind of why I believe in the jumps that Jakari's hopefully making. Is for that reason. I think the staff that seems to be the staff's choice. And I think everyone's forgetting that, after the Cannon Catchings departure, he was the highest rated recruit in that class. Even with Jacobson's hype around him, like Jakari Harris is the highest rated recruit in that class. He has this incredible defensive recruit pedigree that he was recruited on, and also was recruited with a shooting pedigree. He was like I don't know exactly what what the deal was, but I remember him winning like the Allen Iverson 3-point contest in his senior year of high school, and he shot like 38% from three as a senior. He was a good shooter in high school as a recruit. He was an elite defender as a recruit. He showed a lot of on-ball stuff and getting to the basket as a recruit. If this kind of like clicks, I think this just makes me more kind of confident in my Jakari stock that I've been holding since that preview we did for basketball a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I think if you're someone who had bought stock in Jakari Harris, the story certainly makes you feel happy with that.
Yeah, but that's enough talk about basketball. I think it's time to move on to football. Purdue fell to Illinois this last week, unfortunately, but they're back in action against Minnesota. Before we get to that Minnesota game, I wanted to talk a little bit about that Illinois game going down 43-27. Wasn't really the most competitive game, especially after the first quarter. I believe Illinois went on like a 27-0 run in the second quarter, something like that, to really kind of take the lead back and take control of the game. Just kind of initial thoughts from you on that game without getting too into detail. What'd you see? What'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, if you were chasing us on our betting recommendations last week, you probably made bank, said take the over, take Illinois with the points, and that's exactly what happened. Purdue kind of to start out, we were projecting this was going to be a spread it wide offensive blitz of a game, which it did end up becoming. It didn't start that way. I mean, Purdue went up 7-0 in the first quarter, went up 7-0, and Joey, guess what? Purdue returned a punt. We forced a punt. Not only a punt, we forced a 3-and-out on the first possession. Now, they didn't punt again, so we're still 1 punt in 3 games, 1 punt in the last calendar month. But 1 is more than 0, which is what I predicted that we would force in last week's episode. And eventually, Illinois just kind of got rolling, and I'll get a little bit into some schematic stuff here in a few minutes. But for at least the first quarter, Purdue was kind of dictating the pace of the game, and then I think that fumble completely flipped everything. And
yeah, I kind of agree with you. Even though it's only 1 punt, it is nice to be reminded that 3-and-outs do still exist, even when our offense is not on the field. Even though our offense, I mean, that seems like a shot at the offense. Honestly, the offense has been, I think, more than competitive. I think the offense has actually been good. We'll get into that a little bit. But yeah, that fumble really kind of flipped things. And Michael Jackson, too, it hurts, too, that it's a guy who's been not just so good for Purdue, but so kind of steady. Michael Jackson kind of feels like almost the most steady, solid wide receiver, or not even wide receiver, kind of player on the offense. And he kind of had a little bit of a shaky game. Not only did he have the fumble that we're talking about on the catch, but he also fumbled on a punt return. But yeah, I think that's kind of maybe why it kind of shocked the system a little bit so much for Purdue. But at the end of the day, I think if 1 turnover in the first quarter in a game that you're tied in leads to you kind of falling apart for the rest of the game, that's not a good thing. And that is a data point of that's not good. That's good. Football teams don't fall apart when when 1 turnover happens. And do I think that was the only thing that went wrong? No. Do I think that the team showed 0 mental toughness and 0 fight? No. I think the offense actually responded pretty well to that and played pretty competitively. I think at the end of the day, it's just kind of, without beating a dead horse too much, it's kind of echoes our thoughts from the last few weeks. You have this competitive offense, and you're not really a serious contender to beat any of these really good teams when your defense is as iffy as it is right now.
Yeah, this defense is just not a Power 4 level defense. This defense would probably honestly struggle in Group of 5 games. This is, it's just one of the worst defenses in Division I football, or at least on the FBS level. And when you're dealing with that defense, it really doesn't matter how good your offense is. They're really going to struggle to move the ball, and at least often enough and consistently enough to make up for what your defense is giving up on the other side. So it just puts the offense in a bad spot every single game. And, second quarter aside, the offense played pretty well. 27 points isn't anything to write home about necessarily, but it's a good scoring outing. And if you're giving up 43 points, it's going to take a Herculean effort from your offense to overcome that.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the end of the day, Purdue's worst offensive output so far this year is the USC game when they put up 17 points. That's at least fun. That's at least competitive. This is a team that scored 30 against Notre Dame, scored 27 against Illinois. This is an offense that's been able to move the ball too. It's not like they're scoring 30 off of a couple of fluke long plays. Like, yeah, you had the trick play against Notre Dame, but for the most part against Illinois, this offense was able to move the football up and down the field. You had a couple of turnovers that really hurt, but 27 points is not bad at all, especially against a good football team. 27 points is definitely a competitive offensive output, and I think kind of speaks what the offense has been. The offense is not good enough to win you a game Big 12 style when you think back to like the mid 2010s Big 12, when you see defense optional teams throw for 800 yards and win a game 56-50. The offense isn't good enough to do that and play that style of game, but the offense is good enough that if you gave it an average defense, you'd see a lot of wins. Like, I think this is a good offense. I think that's kind of what I want to stick on for this episode, because I do want to stick on some positives. And I have a lot of positive takeaways about this offense. The playmakers seem to be able to make plays even against higher levels of talent. Like, I don't sit there and think that Michael Jackson or Nitro Tuggle or Armad Branch or these guys are really like overmatched athletically on the outside. I don't think that the running backs are having a ton of trouble breaking tackles or making guys miss in space. I think Maccabee has been Maccabee. He's hard to tackle in the open space, really, no matter who he's playing. The offensive line wasn't great against Illinois, but I think it was better than it had been the last couple of weeks. Gave Brown some time. I thought they were able to run the ball a little bit. Antonio Harris had a really, really nice run, got to the outside, showed his speed a little bit. I think that's a guy that we talked about earlier this year that we really weren't sure how to factor him in. We thought the running backs room was going to be really, really talented and really deep, and it hasn't really been super deep through the first few weeks. But if Antonio Harris emerges as a second back and can give Maccabee some reps off, he's a super interesting player to me in the future. I really like what I've seen from the offense so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought the offensive line had their best game of the season in this one. I wasn't like an overwhelmingly dominant performance, right? I mean, but it was impressive nonetheless, given what they put on tape in previous weeks. I thought the run game was pretty solid, right? Maccabee averaged 5.3 yards per carry. Antonio Harris, he had 17.3 average, but that was because he only carried it 4 times. One of them was that huge touchdown run. But even with Maccabee, 11 carries, 58 yards, just sort of steady, churning out first downs, getting into second and manageable. I thought they offered decent pass protection. Ryan Brown threw 50 passes in this game, and he wasn't sacked once, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, shout out the the offensive staff for creating a scheme, because I really do think they helped the offensive line out. But yeah, 50 pass attempts, no sacks for this offensive line, no matter who they're playing, let alone a team like Illinois with a defensive lineman like Gabe Yakas. Like, that's impressive no matter what the scheme is.
Yeah, and I mean, 50 passes, 302 passing yards. Like, having over 300 yards is great. 50 attempts to get there. That's only 6 yards per attempt. That's very low. Wasn't terribly efficient. Only 1 touchdown pass. He didn't throw a pick. He didn't turn the ball over. No, the team turned the ball over, but Brown did not. And, I think if you're looking for positive takeaways, that's it right there. The offensive line against probably maybe one of the best defensive lines they've faced. You can kind of go back and forth with them, Illinois, Notre Dame, or them USC, Notre Dame, excuse me. But, yeah, I mean, this is exactly what you wanted to see from the offensive line. They did their jobs. They're never going to impose their will on an opponent. They did their jobs. They gave Brown time to make plays. They got some movement in the running game. And if we get this performance from the offensive line in the coming weeks, I think it's going to lead to some wins.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that could happen for this team also is just if the offense keeps moving the ball against teams of lesser caliber than Illinois, eventually the defense is going to get some stops. Like, I don't think Minnesota's offense is good enough to go up and down the field no matter who they play. I mean, I think you could line them up against Ball State, and Ball State's defense would be able to get a few stops against Minnesota. Now, I'm not saying Ball State would beat Minnesota or even really be competitive. This has nothing to do with that. But I think that the level of offense we're going to see in the next few weeks is not high enough that they'll be able to just drive up and down the field, especially if the offense is able to continuously move the ball, continuously force the opposing offenses to drive the length of the field. That's kind of the biggest thing. We talked a little bit about the offense. I think that's the only negative takeaway I think I had. I mean, this offense could have been even more productive and I think a little bit more efficient in the passing game. There are a couple of big drops. The wide receivers, that's probably the one negative I had about the offense was there were some real drop problems this week. I think wide receivers had a few more than a couple balls that hit their hands that should have been reeled in that could have been big-ish plays, chunk plays for this offense. But all in all, hard to really knock what the offense did this week. Moving to the defensive side of the ball, I know you had a play you wanted to bring up in specific. We can get into that a little bit.
I wanted to talk a little bit about a specific play that Illinois ran a lot, and talk a little bit about run scheme, how offenses execute their run scheme and how they defend it, and then kind of what went wrong this one play for Purdue. For those who don't know, I work for PFF and a few other sites as an analyst, so I watch a lot of tape, read a lot of articles, and diagram plays as part of my job. And so I'm going to take a look. This is an inside zone run. I'm going to go into my little Joe Jackson bag here. Shout out, Joe. Let's see. All right. So this is a play that Illinois ran late in the first quarter, and we ended up giving up a 12-yard run on 1st and 10 on this play. And I'm going to kind of show you how that happened, what Illinois was trying to do, and how Purdue was trying to defend it. So this is an inside zone run. And inside zone, Illinois runs on almost half of their run snaps. So what does that mean? Well, it means that the offensive line is going to take big steps forward and to the side. So on this play, they're running inside zone to the left, and all of their linemen are heading like this. Okay, they're all heading like this. They're walling off that defense, and the goal is to do two things: to create two holes. Okay, there's a halfback. In this case, they're in shotgun. Halfback is going to take the handoff from the quarterback. Okay, at which point he has a decision to make. He's reading two players. His primary read is going to be the backside A gap. Okay, that's right here. So this is the backside A gap. Actually, let me draw this out. So you got play side over here. And it splits the offensive line in half. Okay. Center's going to go play side. So this play side is where the offensive line is blocking to. That's this direction. This is play side. So play side's the left on this play. The backside is the other side. And Illinois caves our defensive line and creates a massive hole on that play side A gap. And the A gap is the gap between the center and the guard. So right here, there is a highway sitting right here where Illinois just absolutely blows us off the line. But that's not necessarily what the back is reading, because he's looking at our linebackers. His other read is to the outside. So Illinois has two tight ends on this side of the line of scrimmage here that are moving in conjunction with the offensive line. Back is reading this play side A gap, and he's reading off tackle, or in this case, off tight end, to the far side here. Okay? He's reading this linebacker. This is Manny Powell, number 16. This linebacker here, he is going to have a decision to make. He is either going to take away this A gap, in which case the back goes to the outside, or he fires down over here to take that away and forces the back inside. Now, based on the defense Purdue is running here, we only have two linebackers. We have a 5-down line. We have two corners, two safeties, and our two linebackers here. He correctly heads outside. So Manny Powell heads outside to take this away because he knows Charles Correa right here, is going to fill that A gap right here. So what ends up happening is, this is Valentine. This is the Illinois running back on this play. He reads Powell going to the outside and correctly takes it inside, where, again, there's a huge, huge hole that Illinois has caved in our line. However, Coria is right there to make the play. Now, at the start of this, I said that Illinois got a 12-yard gain on 1st and 10. And that is because for as much as Coria makes the correct read and gets down in this hole, he does not make the tackle. And he just doesn't. I don't know how. So he just misses the tackle pretty bad. It's one of the worst whiffs I've ever seen. And it's him one with the back in the hole, and it's not even like the back does some sort of shifty move or like puts his foot in the dirt and goes the opposite direction that Corey is going. He just like runs into the hole, half-heartedly swings his arm, falls down. Almost looked like a Three Stooges sketch, if I'm being honest. It was a bad play. But Illinois runs this play constantly. And a lot of inside zone runs are going to, I mean, that's the basic inside zone run. Like I said, Illinois runs that on almost half of their running plays. The other plays they typically run a lot are man schemes, which are a little bit like inside zone, but instead of sort of moving in conjunction together, you're going to more typically see double team, also called duo. You're going to have two double teams and then guys climbing to the second level, but they're going to create holes in the play side A gap in that sense. And then outside zone, Illinois has a lot of outside zone as well, which typically you're trying to string the defensive line along and then pick your spot. The back has a lot of choices, like where they want to cut in and get upfield. But they run a lot of inside zone, and Purdue did a better job defending it than usual. I will say I was impressed with our run defense in this game as much as the pass, the secondary and the pass defense gave up. But that was one play that Illinois was driving into the red zone, and we really needed to stop and weren't able to get it.
Yeah, I think that that's a play that's kind of a microcosm of how I have kind of looked at this team through a coaching sphere. I know a lot of Purdue fans are really, really kind of impressed with the coaching job, for lack of a better way to put it, from Odom. They're very happy with it. I think there's a little bit left to be desired, but it's honestly so hard because, I mean, the defensive scheme put Coria right where he needed to be. And part of that was Coria's instincts. And to a certain extent, like, Barry Odom can't run out there and make a tackle for Charles Coria. He can't run out there and play pass coverage and not run into each other like the defensive secondary did. So, yeah, I do think that you talked about the running defense. It got a lot better this week. And I think that's at least a step in the right direction. If this defense can at least kind of slow down and stop one aspect of offense, that gives you a fighting chance on that side of the ball. Whereas before, when teams were able to just run the ball at will and throw the ball at will, it doesn't matter really what you do on defense. Like, you can't really take anything away because you already can't take anything away. Like, it's really hard to defend when you can't stop both the run and the pass. So if this defense can at least make things difficult on teams to run the football, especially in these next 3 weeks against a little bit lesser talented teams, I think that you can start to see this defense put themselves in a few more 3rd and longs, obvious passing downs, let the defensive coordinators and the defensive staff kind of scheme up unique pressure fronts and blitzes and things like that can really help this secondary out.
Yeah, kind of on the coaching, like you said, I think there's positives to take away from the coaching, but I do kind of want to talk about what I mean when I say this comes back to coaching, because kind of like you said, like, Odom can't run out in the field and make a tackle. He can't run out on the field and not run into a player trying to get into a spot in coverage. But teams that make these kinds of mistakes again and again and again, which Purdue has been through the first 5 games of the season, that ultimately reflects on the coaching. And this is especially true typically when you see it talked about in the realm of penalties. It's what's called like during play penalties or sort of out of play penalties, right? And a team that has a talent deficit is just going to commit penalties like offensive holding and defensive pass interference more often because they have to, right? If you're getting beat around the edge by a pass rusher, you're going to try and hold on. so he doesn't get to tee off on your quarterback. If you're getting beat deep by a receiver, you're going to put hands on him because, of course, you should. A 15-yard penalty is better than a 50-yard pass. But those are the kinds of things where you can say, well, the talent just isn't there, right? It doesn't really matter how well you're coaching these guys. Now, good coaches will still put them in better positions than bad coaches, teach them better habits and minimize that. But those you typically see as signs of a lack of talent. Other penalties, things like pre-snap penalties, like false start, offsides, illegal formation, illegal shift.
We had what, back-to-back offsides on kickoffs? We had an offside on one kickoff, and the next kickoff we have another offside. That's one of those things that goes back to your point, like those
that's a lack of
procedure penalties, and after the I don't feel like I haven't really noticed a problem with like after the play penalties. I don't see guys just hitting people after the play or out of bounds or anything. Now you had the weird Correa blindside block call that I honestly didn't even know that a blindside block was allowed to be called on the defense. But I mean, you watch the replay and it's like, it should probably be a penalty because what in the world is he even doing? Like, what's he thinking on that play? He just hit a guy out of the play essentially at the end of the play.
That comes like Correa, stupid choice. I mean, the play was basically dead. He just blindsides this blocker for absolutely no reason. Like half a second later, it would have been a late hit penalty, let alone during the play, whatever. So that, again, you can any individual, like the fumble. Well, Odom wasn't the one holding the ball, right? Like running into each other on the deep pass against Notre Dame. Well, he wasn't the one who tripped over his own guy. But at the end of the day, when these things keep happening over and over again, these avoidable mistakes, that reflects on the discipline of the team as a whole, which is a reflection of the coaching. So I'm not saying that Odom is responsible for all these mistakes. I'm not even saying that he's like a bad coach that we be excited for the future with. But for as much as people in the program, fans want to say, like, look, this team isn't very good. Odom's doing the best he can. Look at how good his coaching is, keeping his team afloat. I do want to push back on that a little bit and say there are signs that he's not doing a great coaching job right now. And that doesn't mean he won't be in the future. That doesn't mean he won't really have Coach BJ Fleck next week. Like, who knows? But I do think it's worth pointing out that right now Odom is part of the problem. Part of what we're seeing on the field is a result of a failure from the coaching staff, and it's going to be up to him to fix that moving forward.
On the bright side, I do think that there are a lot of positives to take away on the offensive side of the ball as there are negatives on the defensive side. I really haven't noticed like a ton of procedural penalties or things like that on the offense. And that's kind of the big thing for me is that the offense is not really making these mistakes. Where the offense struggles is, the offensive line isn't as talented as the defensive lines are trying to block. And that's not really a ton you can do about that, especially like at this current moment. And that's not really on coaching. I feel like the scheme really kind of suits the players that they've got on offense. They know what they're working with. Like talked about 50 pass attempts, 6 yards an attempt. That speaks to a bad offensive line with a bunch of weapons at wide receiver and a decent enough quarterback that you trust him to make a couple of quick reads. And that's kind of what Purdue's offense is. And they're able to move the ball with that scheme, and they're not taking bad penalties that are really setting themselves behind the chains that would make this offense not good, honestly. I mean, if this offense isn't good enough to overcome dumb, poor procedural penalties and just massive coaching and mistakes on that end, and they're not. I think that's the hope I have, is that's the side of the ball that I think is competitive talent-wise with who we're playing right now, and they're not making those mistakes. So it gives me a lot of optimism for the defense in the future. But you also talked about PJ Fleck and seeing him. How do you see this matchup against Minnesota going? Now we can kind of switch gears into a more hopefully optimistic preview. I know I'm certainly pretty optimistic about Purdue's chances in this game. Spread opens up at Minnesota -7.5, or it opened at -9.5 per ESPN. It's down to 7.5. Still in favor of Minnesota. Giving me that touchdown, I kind of like the line, but we'll get into picks in the gambling line, towards the end of the episode. What are your initial thoughts on this matchup in Minnesota this week?
Yeah, so Minnesota, they're an interesting team. They are 3-2 on the season. They do have a Big Ten win. They've split their Big Ten games. Obviously, lost to Ohio State in their last game, but they do have a win over Rutgers, team that we'll face in 2 weeks. This is sort of like you talked about. This is us entering the stretch of like, okay, these next 3 games: Minnesota, at Northwestern, home against Rutgers. Those are like the 3 quote unquote winnable games we have left on the schedule. Those are probably the last 3 unranked teams we'll play. I expect Washington will be ranked by the time we face them, second to last game of the season. They're led by their rushing attack more than their passing attack, but they don't have any one standout running back. It's kind of a running game by committee. They have 5 players with at least 15 carries, and they're going to spread the ball around a little bit more than Purdue does in the running game, and they're going to leave it up to us to try and stop it. And I will say I like that matchup for our defense just a little bit more than I would if they were a heavy air it out team. I think on the whole, they're not a super explosive offense, but I mean, we've seen Purdue in these last few games. I don't think they have to be a super explosive offense to score on us. But I don't think they're going to be putting up 45 unless we like completely melt down. And if that happens, we'll have a different conversation on this pod next week. But in theory, the way Minnesota's offense likes to run does play a little bit into what Purdue is at least a little bit better at on defense.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at this Minnesota team, their scores really don't strike fear into you. I mean, through 5 games, they've only thrown for just over 1,000 yards. It's barely over 200 yards a game. And we talked a little bit about this defense starting to find some success in the running side of things and really struggling in the pass side of things. Very, very, I think, nice thing to see for a Purdue defense that's been struggling against the pass is a Drake Lindsay quarterbacked offense that's throwing for around 200 yards a game right now. When you look at it, they played Ohio State last week, went to the shoe, got just kind of utterly rocked in a way that I'm kind of expecting Purdue to get when they see Ohio State, but maybe not that bad. Lost to Cal by 2 scores as well a couple weeks ago. Their only Power 5 win this year is a 3-point win against Rutgers at home. Only beat Buffalo by 13, who I believe just lost to Ball State in the MAC, which I think that's a very good sign for Purdue going into this game. I like the matchup for the defense. And this offense just really hasn't been dominant. Like 14 points against Cal, 3 points against Ohio State, 23 points against Buffalo. Their only really successful game offensively, in my opinion, is that game against Rutgers in which they won by 3. So I think this is a kind of a struggling offense, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, this offense is significantly worse than Purdue's. Purdue is pretty much better across every single statistic. More points per game, more efficient offensively in terms of getting first downs, converting on third down, better passing offense. Minnesota has a slightly better rushing offense by the numbers, but they're basically identical. Purdue averages 3.6 yards per rush. Minnesota averages 3.8. So these are some relatively inefficient running games that both teams try and lean on. And defensively, that's where Minnesota separates themselves from Purdue. I think they have a significantly better defense. But this also is not necessarily as good a defense as the ones we faced in recent weeks either. So there's some hope that, Minnesota, they put up slightly worse offensive numbers than Purdue across a much easier schedule too. Right, they're outside of the Ohio State game, and obviously Ohio State is the best team that either of us have played. They faced Rutgers, Cal, Northwestern State, and Buffalo. That's not, that's not exactly a murderer's row, especially when Purdue has played Illinois, Notre Dame, and USC, 3 ranked teams, right? And Minnesota in that time has played Cal and Rutgers instead of Notre Dame and USC. So there's, as much as we can sit here and compare the numbers of Minnesota to Purdue offensively, I think it's safe to say Purdue should have a decently sized offensive advantage in this game. I think our offense is pretty clearly the better offense. We're putting up better numbers against better competition.
Yeah, I think. Sorry.
Defensively, that's, I think, maybe the issue for Purdue. there's a chance, maybe even a good chance, that Minnesota's advantage on defense is significantly larger than Purdue's on offense.
Yeah, I think what's important to note is that in that game against Ohio State, really the only game against the competition that's comparable to what Purdue's seen the last few weeks, they put up 160 total yards of offense and allowed 475. Not only did they get dominated on the scoreboard, they got dominated on a play-by-play basis. They couldn't move the football. Ohio State did whatever they wanted. And now, obviously, we're not Ohio State, but I think that data point might even be more relevant than what we saw against Northwestern State. I mean, I don't think this Purdue defense is good, but they're more comparable to Ohio State than Northwestern State at this point, I think. And so maybe I have too much faith, but at the very least, there are some Power 5 caliber players on this defense, even if the defense itself isn't Power 5 caliber in a way that I don't know if like Northwestern State can replicate. I think this game needs to turn into a kind of this offensive shootout if Purdue wins. I think if this is a game where you need defenses to kind of come through and get stops, that's not the game Purdue is going to want to play against Minnesota. I think that the rushing attack, especially if Minnesota gets up early, the rushing attack will really kind of hamper Purdue. It'll keep the offense off the field, force the defense to get stops, and I don't like that recipe. However, if the offense has a lot of success early, is able to drive up and down the field, force Minnesota to kind of throw the ball, as crazy as that sounds, like against a secondary, I think that kind of gets Minnesota out of what they want to do. PJ Fleck kind of wants to turn it into a similar game as Barry Odom, where it forces the defenses to make excuse me, sorry, make a stop, kind of bend but don't break defense, and the offense wants to control the ball and drive down the field. So whichever offense has more success, I think will win this football game. And I don't know, I kind of like Purdue's offense's chances, especially after all the success they've had against the talent they've seen the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think there's avenues for Purdue to win this game for sure, where I didn't see them the last couple of weeks. Minnesota obviously not nearly the caliber of Notre Dame, USC, Illinois, but to your point, I think there's ways this Purdue offense can attack them. I think we can consistently move the ball. If Purdue's offense struggles, I think it's going to be more about them than Minnesota's defense. Not necessarily that we're going to put 40 points or anything like that, but like if we're struggling to like convert on third down, if we're like not really able to get in a scoring range, I think that's going to be because Purdue's making mistakes, or just the offensive line had that one good game against Illinois, and then kind of comes back down to earth this week against Minnesota.
Yeah, I think the good news is that I don't think this defense is a particularly awful matchup for the Purdue offense. I think the Purdue offense is okay, kind of churning down the field 4 or 5 yards of play at a time. It's almost what they want to do. The good news is that this Minnesota defense doesn't really force a lot of chaos. Only 14 total sacks on the year, only 6 total turnovers forced on the year, and that's when factoring in multiple games against significantly inferior competition. Like those sack numbers, I haven't checked to be certain, but I'm sure the 14 sacks are somewhat inflated by playing Buffalo and Northwestern State the first 2 games. This is not a defensive line that I think is going to cause a ton of problems for a Purdue offensive line. That's probably the weak link on offense. They aren't going to force a ton of turnovers, which Ryan Brown has struggled with at times, especially against teams like a USC or a Notre Dame that really do want to kind of turn up the heat, force a lot of mistakes, force turnovers, things of that nature. So I think this is a pretty good schematic matchup for Purdue. I don't think this is a Minnesota defense that's looking to cause a lot of problems in the areas that Purdue's offense struggles.
Yeah, just double checked. Only 4 of Minnesota's sacks came in those 2 games against Buffalo and Northwestern State. So they seem to be pretty consistently getting 2 or 3 sacks a game, no matter who they play. But yeah, I mean, to your point, I think this is not, like you said, it's not a Minnesota team that thrives on chaos, that causes a lot of havoc, which I think is what Purdue is particularly susceptible to on offense. I'll add, though, that Purdue's dink and dunk offense, if forced into it, while they can do that, the more opportunities you give a team like Purdue to shoot themselves in the foot, the more they're going to do that. And that's sort of the game plan with Minnesota. Was like, keep everything in front of you, make them go down the field 6 yards of play. They're not going to be able to execute a 14-play drive, every time out, which I think is probably true. And if they're going to be a very opportunistic defense, get a couple key takeaways, a sack in a big moment, give their offense some shorter fields, that's, I think, the path for Minnesota winning this game. And if they're able to do that successfully, I think that's a pretty good path for them.
Yeah, and I think that's where it goes back to what you talked about converting on third down. That's kind of where this game is going to be, I think, won or lost by the Purdue offense, and that's really speaks to that style that Minnesota wants to play. If the poor drives for Purdue where they don't execute 14 plays and score a touchdown, they still pick up a third down or two, are able to flip the field and force the Minnesota offense to do the exact same thing. That's a big recipe for success. If all of a sudden those drives turn into, instead of picking up 1 or 2 third downs and punting from the 44-yard line, you're throwing a pick on your own 30, I don't trust this defense from Purdue to have success in that style of game. So I really do think that this is going to come down to third down, as I think a lot of Purdue games will come down to this year, is whether or not this offense can get themselves into third and manageable and then convert. The good news is I think that'll happen. I think that for the first time in a few weeks, this team might be able to establish the run a little bit. I think even more so than last week, even when you had a little bit of success on the ground game, it was kind of boom or bust a little bit. You had a couple of chunk plays from Maccabee. You had the big touchdown from Antonio Harris. I think this week you could see a little bit more steady, especially with the style that Minnesota wants to play. They're not going to bring a ton of pressure all the time. And so if this offensive line kind of plays the way they did against Illinois, I think you see Devin Maccabee and Antonio Harris have a lot of success on the ground, more so than you've seen against any other Power 5 opponent this year.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Are we about ready to get into predictions here?
I think that's a good idea. So as we talked about, the spread at the moment is 7.5. And I believe I'll check the over-under as well. But I'll throw it to you for your prediction against the spread. How do you see the final score in this one playing out?
I'll take Purdue with the points here. I think 7.5 is a lot, even on the road. But I am going to pick Minnesota to win this. I think Minnesota has done something that Purdue has not done yet. They've been tested and pulled out a close win against a team of a similar caliber. They got that 3-point win over Rutgers. Purdue just has not been in that position yet this year, and I worry about our execution on offense in late game scenarios. If one drive to win it, put the ball in Ryan Brown's hands, they can do amazing things, but that's when Minnesota can dial up pressure. That's when it becomes just a pure drop back passing game. I don't know if I trust our offensive line to hold up in that scenario. So give me Minnesota by about 4, probably in the upper 20s, low 30s kind of a game, or like 31-27 or something like that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo your sentiment on the spread. I would definitely pick Purdue plus the 7.5. I think this game is almost for sure within a touchdown, at least in the Purdue direction. I don't see a world where Minnesota's offense is able to dominate this game enough to really put Purdue away. Maybe call me optimistic. I think there's a path where the Purdue offense has a lot of success against a lesser defense than what they've seen the last few weeks. The defense finds a way to get a few stops. I think it could maybe go a couple possessions Purdue's way, depending on the style of game. But I think I'm going to take Purdue to win a close one. I think the Purdue offense kind of imposes their will a little bit for the first time in a few weeks. I think this offense has had a lot of success against defenses that have received a lot of praise going into the year. I mean, USC didn't have a ton of preseason hype around their defense, but in the first few weeks, they were one of the best statistical defenses, caused a lot of problems up front, did a lot of things that affected Purdue. But Notre Dame and Illinois were both top 10-ish to top 15 teams in the country coming into the year. A lot of hype on defense. Obviously, the hype around Illinois fell off a little bit with Indiana putting up 63, but I think that's a little bit of an anomaly. Two very good defenses, and Purdue is able to put up 30 points. If Purdue gets to 40, I don't think there's a world where Minnesota's offense is able to keep up with that. And I do think there's a world where Purdue gets to 40.
I can see it.
So I think with that, that about does it for our kind of recap of the Illinois game and the preview of the Minnesota game. Hopefully we get a good game this week against Minnesota. Maybe edge out a win for Purdue, get our first Power 5 win in 2 years. That'd be fantastic. And sooner rather than later, we have some previews coming for the Kentucky game. So enjoy your weekend, Boiler Nation. Hopefully we get a win this week. And thanks for listening.